Let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome to our first Stillhouse Loves Poetry event. Stillhouse Press is a student and alumni run press established in 2014. We are based out of George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. We have published 11 books with 4 more titles forthcoming. As a teaching press, we strive to educate students through every step of the publishing process, from reviewing manuscripts to developing the manuscripts to their fullest potential to print and marketing. Our books have earned New York Times book reviews and a Pushcart Prize. We couldn't be more pleased to share a selection of our work with you this afternoon.
Hey there. My name is Tommy Sheffield, and I'm the poetry editor for Stillhouse Press. I'm going to be your MC for tonight, and we have 3 wonderful poets, all of whom I've had the pleasure of working on books with. Megan Merchant is a spectacular writer and an ethereal thinker whose grasp of imagery is often breathtaking. She's also a wonderful person, and it has been a joy getting to know her as we worked on her book. Her newest book, Before the Fevered Snow, was released in April 2020 by Stillhouse Press. It's already received numerous reviews, mostly, well, like all positive. I don't think we've had anything else than that. A New York Times book review mention and a feature on Poetry Daily for poems.com, which is definitely worth looking at. And I can't wait to see what comes next. Dean Smith's writing, which often focuses on the city of Baltimore, is incisive and elegaic, able to critique as well as empathize with the horrors and highs of the city. Though his award-winning first book, American Boy, focused on his childhood and family, his new book, Baltimore Sons, set to be released by Stillhouse Press in fall of 2021, expands beyond memoir into a full-scale analysis of the city. Phil Goldstein is new to the poetry scene, but he's definitely worthy of notice. His writing strikes at the heart of trauma, taking us as close as possible to the wounds, while also keeping us engaged throughout with imagery and strong voice. His first book of poetry, How to Bury a Boy at Sea, is slated to release in the spring of 2022. His narrative is important, and he hopes his book will help other survivors of child sexual assault to confront their trauma and perhaps speak out. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each poet, beginning with Megan, and they'll read 4 poems, and then we'll do a little interview afterwards, ask a few questions. So first we'll have Megan, and I'm going to introduce her. So writing out of Prescott, Arizona, Megan Merchant lives with her husband and 2 children. She's the author of 4 full-length poetry collections, Gravel Ghosts, Dark's Humming, Grief Flowers, and Before the Fevered Snow. She's also written 4 chapbooks and a children's book titled These Words I Shaped for You. She has been awarded the 2016-17 COG Literary Award, the 2018 Beulah Rose Poetry Prize, and most recently, 2nd place in the Pablo Neruda Prize for Poetry. She is an editor at Pyrenees Fountain and the Comstock Review. She's also an incredible person, and I had the pleasure of working with her as the managing editor of Before the Fevered Snow, published by Stillhouse Press in April. Megan's poetry deals with overcoming struggle and loss through the lens of family, parenthood, and personal experience, and makes use of natural imagery and amazing lyrical moments to focus in on the particulars of human experience that often go unnoticed. In Before the Fevered Snow, Merchant uses the natural world as her canvas, mapping the abstract shape of the American social consciousness onto a wintry landscape of marriage, motherhood, and grief. In the titular poem, Merchant writes, Before the fevered snow, there was an eyelet and bright button, hair snipped from sleeping others, and wed around my finger. You cut it with your tongue. And the light that came from your mouth burned hot, so we didn't need to speak. In moments like this, Megan's book asks us to consider the smallest details and the great possibilities that they have to ignite our imagination. All right, everyone, please welcome Megan Merchant.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction. You guys can hear me okay? Okay. I'd much rather hear somebody talk about my work than me try to explain it. I always feel like, I mean, you know, you've worked so closely on this book too, Tommy, and so I appreciate that insight into my work. It's wonderful to hear. And thank you all for curating this space. I'm super jazzed to be able to share these poems today from this book. Any chance I get to share this work is pretty awesome. So thank you very much. And I'll start with, this This poem, the world in which I open Google Earth and my mother is feeding the horses. I imagined it differently. The paddock flooded, the donkey and sheep, a fence over, cuddled under the mare. I want to pull up and show her my new haircut so she can make that face, then make the word okay sound like a derailment. I want to tell her about the fire and how our neighbor scrambled the yard gathering her chickens through smoke. I never found out what she did with them, if she scrunched those warm, feathery bodies into the back of her station wagon and took off for Tempe or Tallahassee. My mother would know. She wanted to become the patron saint of animals, and I imagine she hasn't stopped auditioning for the gig. I imagined that she would come to me too after death, after whiskey or crosswords on a Tuesday morning, when the kids were in school and the ravens etched treetop to treetop hunting, after crying when her sickbed blanket made it into my hands, after her guitar string broke, or the prayer to some Sunday school saint hedges out of my mouth, the one where I'm in the drop-off line and wince, handing my children over. I ask her to stay with them, keep them alive. In her eyes, I was always coming up short. Why not turn the reins over now that she is ephemera? But it turns out she has been home all along, arranging the horses' feed bags the exact way they like them, as if she knew that would be the one thing we would never figure out alone. I started writing these poems when my mom got sick. She had a brain tumor that was misdiagnosed as a rare form of Alzheimer's, where she lost not only her memories and abilities, but also her sight. So I started writing these poems as a way to kind of hold those memories and to keep them. And I realized that yesterday, thanks to Facebook, yesterday was the anniversary of the last day that she was a person out in the world before she had surgery. And so this feels really timely to be able to read and share these poems today on that level as well. Hang with me 1 second. My bookmark got misplaced. All right. Gifts from the crows. I leave kitchen scraps and star charts, maps of glass that broke in the sky. They slip gifts near my door, paper cups, bright buttons, bent wire. Tokens so simple, I wonder if I've lifted them in sleep, barefoot under the gas lights. I read about houses shored with whalebone and timber washed up on sand and structured into a stable compound, cement or stucco. Every woman knows that even beauty is surrounded by hard. The most difficult days, I wait to sleep until I hear the metronome of crows, frenzied by a cast of hawks that screech nearby. In the morning, crow bones, chewed clean, drop from the trees. Their feathers make dark doorways in the snow. One of the things I think I'm going to try for my next book is less alliteration. It makes it easier to read. A lot of these poems also deal with some of the systemic problems that we're facing as a country, and gun violence is one of them. And it's a common theme throughout here. So I thought I would share one of those today as well. This one's entitled "The Gun Collecting Dust in Our Closet." I loved the world until a man showed me how easy it is to flick the safety off, how weighted the end butted into my shoulder, the nook where my son burrowed his head to sleep. Both the bulk of that gun and translucent skin of my son's forehead stumped my breath equally. What does that say about love? I imagine mothers who give birth but come home empty, their breasts leaking anyhow. They loved the world once too. Between us, a thin sheet of red, miles of windows dark, and the dust is a lullaby small enough for my hands to fold. It coats the leaves, blanketing the ground, stifling wildflowers and weeds. We cannot hold a note long enough to slow a heart. And this last poem was recently published in the Octio Review. And I haven't been writing a lot lately. During this pandemic, I feel as if I just haven't found that language yet to express what we're all kind of going through. And also there's this stifling that's happening by being stuck in the house and not engaging with the world in the ways that I'm used to and connecting with other people. But I was able to write this poem, and so I'm happy to share that today. Kind of speaks to what's going on in the world. Parenting a pandemic. A wolf slow-paced the driveway. This is not a fairy tale, even though I chose the house with the red door. I cannot handle another emergency, my husband warns. He means somatically. I've bulked up the pantry with distant expiration dates and washed each vegetable twice. I think of the rabbits and ravens, throw rinds and skins out the back to the edge of trees. We are practicing social distancing, even though it goes against what my therapist has been telling me for months. We need each other to survive. After listening to the news, only peelings of light are left, which means if I want to catch it, I have to wade between bark and needles where it's trapped. But the scruff on that wolf was gray and raised. I worry how quickly he could take my child's head into its mouth. Chew carefully, I tell my children, then show them how to cut the strips of meat on their plates into small enough pieces with a dulled knife. Good mother, I offer myself. You have seasoned fear, made it digestible. Each morning I choose a new song to hum while we wash our hands. I pocket my own to keep from pinching color into their cheeks.
So now there's that cushion of silence that follows a reading, but without the applause that should be there because that was so good. But at the same time, it can be silent, it can be visual. So we got a few questions for Megan. So this is such a loaded question, but I'm gonna drop it on you anyway. What was your inspiration for the book? There's like 50 different routes you could take based on how we put this together. So.
And I was thinking about that earlier, and so it feels weird for me to use the word inspiration because it came from an almost dark place. Like I said, I was going through my mother's illness and then her death, and it was fairly prolonged. And so I turned to writing, I turned to poetry as a way to hold parts of her, parts of the memories that we shared, and also parts of myself that I was losing because she had carried those and held those for me. And I turned to poetry as a way to try to make that experience as beautiful as I could and to be able to sit with it and be present inside of it instead of submerge it. So it feels weird to use that kind of term inspiration for these poems, but I was literally just trying to breathe in and breathe out and move through everything as gracefully and beautifully as I could.
That's a really good answer. So it's almost like the poems were part of the process of grieving in a way, rather than something that were inspired by something else. It's more part of the process. I like that. So here's the next question that's going to be quite a bit to handle. What's it been like releasing your book during a worldwide pandemic? I know there's irony in me asking that over Zoom, but
Oh, well, I have an analogy, but it's not appropriate. It has been a thing. So one of the things that I was most excited about for this book was I finally had the ability to be able to travel and share this work. So this is my fourth full-length collection. When Gravel Ghosts came out, I was a new poet. I didn't have a lot of reading opportunities. And then The Dark's Humming was published, and my youngest son stopped speaking, and we were moving through his autism diagnosis, and I was his anchor into this world. And so I couldn't be separated from him, and couldn't travel and share this. And then when Grief Flowers came out, it was right about the time that my mom was going into the hospital for her surgery. And so I couldn't travel and share those poems as well. And so I was really excited for this book. I had a ton of readings lined up around the country and travel plans, and was just thrilled to be able to connect the work to others and to share it and to have that experience. But that got squashed, quickly. So I'm trying not to let it feel defeating. Like I said, any opportunity to share this work is greatly valued, and it's still connecting and it's still sharing. And that's the best part for me of writing the book, is when these poems are done, being able to take them out into the world and to share them. So that's the fun part. So I'm trying to have fun with it, but it's defeating.
so given all that, though, I think you've done a tremendous job of making sure that people are still noticing this book. I think all the interviews, all the press materials that have come out for the book, I've been pretty astounded by everything that's coming out with readers. So, I mean, I think that despite the obvious limitations of a global worldwide pandemic sort of situation, I mean, I think we're doing pretty well with it. So I did want to ask one question about publishing a book. What is your favorite and least favorite part of writing and publishing a book?
My favorite part, I'd have to say, is the putting together of the manuscript, the giving it a shape and form. And I absolutely love that portion of it, where I take all the poems and I try to pull the different threads to figure out how they connect to each other, how they progress, how they flow. I usually spread them out all over the house, sometimes in different rooms based on different sections, and I move things around. And I really enjoy that part. I am able to see new aspects of the work that I wasn't when they're paired or connected with other poems. And it's pretty cool how it kind of makes this fuller picture. And that's probably my favorite part. And my least favorite part, traditionally speaking, is editing the manuscript. And I shouldn't say that because I'm also an editor, but editing my work is really difficult. And I don't know if a lot of other readers or writers experience that as well, but the editing your own poems is really challenging because you tend to see what you intended instead of what's actually happening on those pages. But I was able to work with you, Tommy, and it was really fun. And instead of just trying to correct or fix the poems, I actually learned a lot about what was working inside of them, what wasn't. And that was an awesome experience. So it's no longer my least favorite part, but traditionally it has been.
Thank you. That was so nice. So we have one question from S.A. Bergfalk on Facebook. Megan, tell us what it felt like to have your work recognized by the New York Times.
I may have gone out on my back porch and started screaming with joy. That was incredible, especially given that was in April, I believe, when that came out, and when the book came out in April. And it really lifted my spirits because it felt very defeating to have the book come out and not be able to travel to go to AWP to share. And so it was incredible. I mean, I'm at a lot, loss for words describing it, but it was very rewarding, and it made it feel like, hey, this is all okay. All that hard work was worth it.
I think that's a great place to end for that reading. I loved the way you put that. Okay, so now we're going to go to Dean Smith. So let me give the intro and then we'll get into the poems. Dean Bartoli Smith is a tremendously talented author, poet, and freelance journalist. His book of poems, American Boy, won the 2000 Washington Writers' Prize and was awarded the Maryland Prize for Literature in 2001 for the best book published by a Maryland writer over the past 3 years. His poetry, fiction, and prose have been published in numerous magazines and journals. He is also the author of Never Easy, Never Pretty, A Fan, a City, a Championship Season. Smith received an MFA in poetry from Columbia University in 1989. He is an adjunct professor of publishing in the Masters in Professional Studies program at George Washington University and the director of Duke University Press. Dean's work focuses on the role that family and parenthood play, especially in the larger social context of urban cities, specifically Baltimore, Maryland, where many of his poems take place. While most of his poetic work is hard-edged memoir, his new book, Baltimore Sons, set to release from Stillhouse Press in fall of 2021, also focuses on the effects that guns, violence, drugs, and familial dysfunction have on urban environments and family life, especially within the city of Baltimore. His titular poem, Baltimore Sons, Dean writes that 343 people were murdered in Baltimore in a single year, and that the average victim had 11 arrests, the average suspect 9, no motive for half of the killings, mostly Black, mostly male, mostly drug-related, mostly between 18 and 34. By elegizing the many victims of Baltimore's violent streets, Dean shows us his love for the city and his desire for it to improve and the violence to end. Please welcome Dean Bartoli Smith.
Thank you, Tommy. I appreciate everything that you've done for the manuscript and your comments and how you made it better. And I'll start with a poem about my father. At the Belloc Diner, the moment I knew my father loved me occurred a few weeks after I left my wife. We both ordered the breakfast special, 2 eggs over easy, hash browns, scrapple, and black coffee on a bright summer morning. He wore sunglasses in the booth, pretending to read the sports page. "It's a good thing you didn't have children," he said, and glanced out the window. I could see his eyes in the angle of the sun, behind the lenses, welling up, as he drifted to nights spent alone in this diner, single again, with a hot roast beef sandwich, reading the sports page, while my brother and me slept in a bedroom across town where he used to tuck us in. So it's hard to find 4 poems out of 60 to read, but I had a switch, given what's gone on with the passing of RBG and the fact that my mother was an attorney who had the opportunity to be sworn in to the Supreme Court. I'm going to read a poem about her last few days with us. And it takes place on the road from Rochester to Ithaca. 3 poems of departure on Route 96. 1. Oxblood leaves and snapdragons on the orchard grass, fresh for eating. I raced to catch Joan Baez at the State and hear her sing the night they drove Old Dixie down, because she reminded me of you driving a rusted out maroon Corvair when that song came on WCAO. I'm in the back seat playing Barrel of Monkeys. They never should have taken the very best. Eyes on the road, a doe to my left bursts headlong across the field like a greyhound, hooves aloft, hell-bent for the Prius in front of me. She glanced off the bumper and soared over my car in a silent and peaceful arc. I followed her flight to the ground, rippling on impact. 2. Passing through Interlaken, all closed up on Martin Luther King Day. You on my mind the whole way, rehashing lines from your note, trying to diagnose your condition. The only business in town marked open, with a red, white, and blue banner unfurling in a squall at dusk, and a spotlight fixed on the sign, guns and ammo. You made framed collages of Dr. King, one with jagged crepe paper drops of blood from his head. I stared at them for hours as a boy. The last paragraph revealed the perfect vision of you, marching out of the hospital, mink coat, nightgown, diva shades, and no underwear, tube still attached, waving goodbye. Ghosting drifts rise and dance on a white gold sheet, untouched at sunset, wisping torsos and faces swirling in legions across the road. This is when I knew. And so a lot of the poems take place in Baltimore, and a lot of the poems don't. You know, they sort of Baltimore as a place and as a lens to then look out across the nation and the world in some ways. I would say love, death, race, and war are the main themes of the collection, which took 20 years to put together. My third poem is Reading James Baldwin on Election Day in Charleston. Your voice rises into molasses-laden air under a canopy of palmettos, firing salvos into my soul. I sit in the park by the old citadel, built to quell slave revolts, now a pink castle called Embassy Suites, its lobby arrayed in ceiling fans and ferns, plantation style. The blood-stained banner of the South unfurls its blue sartoire, those hideous bars of rejection embraced by the blinkered and deadly dumb among us, who amass guns like grocery items to feed new rebellions. The Church of Mother Emanuel is locked up, now a fortress against another invasion, her cross off plumb, those bodies still turn to their God, studying a book in prayer, like those bodies in the synagogue turn to their God, studying a book in prayer, where bullets become crucifixion nails. And last poem is called Riots, and this one does take place in Baltimore, and as Tommy said, it's about fatherhood. Fathers, sons, mothers, daughters find their way into this collection. Riots. No gunshots or sirens before supper that night in Little Italy after the melee, and you kept repeating, "It's too quiet," in the back seat, afraid for your life, hatred gusting around you and your lower lip tinged blue, like when I cradled you moments after birth, too angry to breathe. Trembling in the seatbelt, you said, "It's not safe out there, Daddy. Don't make me go." Footage from the night before ran through your 8-year-old mind. A boy smashing the back window of a police car, storefronts exploding, a microburst tearing across the street outside the ballpark. I told you the riots were over. Choppers scanned alleyways with searchlights, chunks of plate glass and mounds like cooler ice. I lied to you that it was safe to come out because you'll never know how much I love this city, every inch of its hard-up streets, its finger-scraped mustard from back fins and splinters from bleacher seats when Eddie Murray stepped to the plate. How most days I still dream of running underneath a Johnny Unitas touchdown pass to feel that roar in the upper deck on the back of my neck, and how I carry with me the taste of the chocolate snowball topped with marshmallow, and an image of the harbor at dusk from Federal Hill with the ruby letters of Domino Sugar blinking into an electric indigo sky. But this would never be your hometown. You, my son, knew too much about a corner boy past his prime, like David Simon's Bodie Broaddus, too long in the game, in the wrong place for a rough ride downtown at 8 a.m. You knew that no one cradled him on the steel floor of a paddy wagon, tossed around, unresponsive, like so many other dead boys littered across the city, in car trunks, on front lawns, in dumpsters, and you felt anger simmering on all sides like the lid of a crab pot boiling over. The next day, a phalanx of police crouched like sitting ducks as bricks hammered their shields, a pharmacy looted and torched, an unfinished senior center burned to the ground. I'm not hungry, Daddy. Please take me home. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dean. So we're going to do a few questions now with Dean Smith. First one, when did you start writing poetry, and what, we're going to use that same word we used with Megan earlier, what inspired you to get started?
Well, so I would say that poetry is I write narrative poetry, a lot of narrative poetry, so it's an easy way to tell stories for me without having to write a longer fiction or short fiction. So I'm in and out faster, and I can tell the story that way. But I think I distinctly remember maybe sometime 13 or 14 writing something that was an attempt at a song or a poem. But I don't know. I read a lot of it and just decided to start doing it when I was in college because it kind of gave me something to do that was different or just than what my my friends were all into. It was the Reagan years. It was early 1980s, and it was a way to kind of establish a different type of identity, I think.
So you have a background in sports writing and journalism. Did that happen, from what I've seen of the timeline, so that happened after you started writing poetry? How have those things kind of worked together? And do you find one thing sort of overlapping into another, sports writing, journalism, and the poetry? Do those seem to be linked in some way?
What I would say is, yes, exactly. I mean, I grew up, I'm the son of a basketball coach. My father was very interested in sports. When, you talk about this, you read the sports page was something where he got it first, and we all waited to get it next because that was, where the knowledge was, and that meant studying the box scores. And, basically, I think in one of the poems talk about learning how to read by reading the headlines in the sports page or the verbs. You have these great verbs like trampled and pummeled and clouded. I mean, if you just, at 6 or 7 years old, I was trying to read reports of different games. And so I think, and I'm attracted to what is poetical and ironic in sports. I'm not anybody that wants to do fantasy football or any of that. And, I'm not particularly enamored with the game of football. It's just that the characters and the heroes around that sport were really interested me as a kid. Baltimore won world championships then, and that was, you lived and died on all that. The whole town did, and you were the one to point out, Tommy, that really the fabric of the city sort of pulled apart at its heart when Memorial Stadium was torn down. That whole kind of created a crater or sort of a void in the city where people came together from all different walks of life would come together, and all different ethnic and racial groups came together there in what is situated as the heart of the city. So I think for me, if something is interesting along those lines, I'll pursue it. Something like there's a line in a poem that I'm not going to have in the collection, but it's when my cleats have reached the warning track and my innings are almost done, I want heaven to be a grand old ballpark with bleachers in the sun. To me, I dream a lot about being in Memorial Stadium still, and it's been torn down for many, multiple decades. So.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about your role now. How did you get from poet to head of Duke University Press? Can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in publishing? How did that go?
So I was getting an MFA at Columbia and working at Columbia University Press for the tuition exemption, and didn't want my writing to have anything to do with what was, what my work was. I wanted to be in publishing, but not in trade or fiction, because I I wanted to learn, I wanted to keep that separate for whatever reason. The rest is like hard work, luck, being in my publishing career, being in situations where I'm been able to work on bigger problems like electronic publishing and things like that, or bigger challenges, and not having as much time to be able to write poetry. This book took 20 years to come into fruition. So hopefully they'll be at a place like Duke University Press. It's a perfect kind of merger of the things that I do. All, whether it's writing or sports, or, I want to do books about basketball because we're at Duke, or things, that I feel like it's a natural movement towards that. But I'm just fortunate to, it's all, you just, like, you work hard, Tommy. You did a great job. You know what it's like. So you got to put in the time. It doesn't come, none of this, it comes without work. So
I think we have time for one more quick question. So this doesn't have to be answered quickly, but I think I'm just going to try to state it quickly. How did your book, Baltimore Suns, begin to take form? Beginning, right? You can tell us a little bit more about where it's at now, but.
Sure. So the main, and like Megan, it started with this idea of the gun in society, and how the gun, where does it start? I was thinking from the point of view of in childhood, you're introduced to all these different types of weapons. And I grew up when the Vietnam was, there were Tommy guns and plastic, on the backs of comic books were the pictures of BB guns and things like that. So you were socialized at a very young age to have this sort of embraced. And then the one part about my father owning a gun, which is where the first few poems came about, that was something that was unsettling to me, and I now understand it a lot better, but it was just unsettling. And that's sort of out of that unsettled feeling came the poems, and that's where most of my poems come from, is from places of being unsettled. And that's in a way to deal with that object. I thought it was the perfect, as Eliot's essay of the objective correlative. The gun symbolizes so many things. I mean, there's erotic aspects to it. There's all kinds of different ways you can go with it. It seemed like a freeing up, a place to begin to just sort of think about all kinds of different things, relationships even. So, but that's where it started, and it's sort of, moving back to Baltimore in 2010 allowed me a lens to look back at my childhood from a different perspective, and then to see how the city had changed, because the city, and Greg knows this too, Greg Wilhelm, but the city, one time, when Greg said to me, when as a kid he could see the lights of Memorial Stadium from Hamden, where he grew up. Well, my dad grew up in Hamden as well, and so it was immediately, there's a linkage that about if you're in Baltimore about those types of things. So it became a lens and looking back, and it took a while after I moved back there to start writing poems, but then there were a couple of things that started coming through, and to try to make sense of how it had changed, because there were whole neighborhoods that were no longer the same, and things that had happened as part of that crater, as part of that disassembling of the city's fabric. And I think that's the main, you hit this right away. You said you need to have something about what's happening in the poem about Memorial Stadium is what the real crux of the book is. So
yeah, it's that sort of the vacuum that got left by the loss of that stadium, and the way that the city has kind of changed since then. Okay, all right, great.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, thank you. Let's go ahead and let's do our next poet. So Phil Goldstein is a poet, journalist, and content marketer who has been living in the Washington, D.C. area for a dozen years. His poetry has appeared in or is forthcoming in the Ideate Review, in parentheses, Awakened Voices, Amethys Review, the Galway Review, October Hill Magazine, Constellations, the Indianapolis Review, and Rust and Moth. His debut poetry collection, How to Bury a Boy at Sea, explores the trauma of childhood sexual abuse and the difficult journey to healing that men face. By day, he works as a senior editor for Manifest, a content marketing agency writing about technology and government. He currently lives in Alexandria, Virginia with his fiancée, Jenny, and their animals, a dog named Brenna and two cats, Grady and Princess. Phil is a kind and caring individual. This is immediately apparent when you talk to him. But he also possesses intense emotional strength and a cunning artistic vision. Phil's first book of poetry, slated to release from Stillhouse Press in April 2022, is an achingly candid first-person glimpse into one man's reckoning with child sexual abuse and is one of the few sexual abuse narratives to feature a male perspective. It also shows us how Phil has been able to build a family for himself despite his trauma. I never said no because I was too young to know how, or that I could or should or would want to. I never said no. Goldstein writes in Immature Answers, reflecting on the sexual traumas he suffered from age 10 to 12 at the hands of his older brother. In this collection, Goldstein is the architect of his own unburdening, guiding readers through his abuse, its resulting impacts on his psyche, sense of self, and relationships, and ultimately, his path to acceptance and rebirth. Each poem a brick in the foundation of his grief, Goldstein confronts what it means to be a real man, emerging from an early darkness to a healed and humbled lightness of being. Everyone, Phil Goldstein.
Thank you, Tommy. I really appreciate that introduction. So I'm going to read 4 poems. This is actually only the second time that I've read poetry from the manuscript in public. So I'm really excited to be here with you all to do this. As Tommy said, my book of poetry is about childhood sexual abuse, but it's about, not just the abuse, but what results from that kind of trauma and how it ripples out into your life, and what happens when you decide to confront it. And I think that it's important to recognize before I get started that a lot of people don't wind up confronting trauma that's happened to them, especially trauma from their childhood, or it takes them a very, very long time to do so. The average age of disclosure of child sexual abuse is actually 52 years old, which is something that astounded me when I first learned about it. So just wanted to set that as the context. So this poem is called What a Bed Takes In. The things I've seen would make me tear out my eyes if I had any. What I felt from so many years ago still stains me deep in every fiber of my being, no matter how many times I am washed. I saw a boy, thin of frame, drawn into my center by a larger one, stronger, who pushed the little one's head under my folds, and there it circled the frenulum for quite some time. But I am a keeper of secrets, young and old, partner to bodies, young and old, caressing each softly with a cool embrace at night, like the wind that kisses the branches outside my window. I am gray now and always have been, accumulating wisdom over the years, day by day, a repository for thoughts spoken and silently voiced inside the heads of men and boys. I am the silent partner. I am not the procurer. I wished I could break down, but I simply stayed still. I let it wash over me and I was silent, though my joints and my filling were on fire. All of these years later, I want to swallow myself whole for letting it happen, for not shouting, for not even breathing a word. I should have protected that small boy, and I let him be devoured. How does one recover from witnessing such pain? Will I tell you, dear reader, of all that I know? Can you wring it out of me like water or semen? Will I collapse in a heap, damp at your feet? Can you stretch me in the rack, tortured and taught? Even then, what am I? Certainly not what you see and touch every day. Surely, nothing so neat and serene and soft could hold so much inside. The book, as we're constructing it together, Tommy and I and the rest of the staff at Stillhouse kind of has this progression that moves primarily from the past through to the present. And so there are lots of, different kind of milestones along the way. The next poem that I'm gonna read is more of a reflection looking back, than something that distinctly happened in the past. So it's called Growth. I could tell the way he touched me was strange, but not necessarily wrong. He told me and told me that it was normal. How could something that felt so good be wrong? I drifted above myself, turning over that question in my mind, over and over. For 2.5 years, I was a bundle of confusion, sticks stacked every which way. We did the normal routines, washing our hands, clearing our plates, rising for the Shema, out in the open. In the open fields, everyone can see how you grow, how you take in sunlight and breathe. We became intertwined when nobody could see. Our roots and limbs grew in the darkness. I didn't know then that foxglove and violets bloom in shade. What is it like to be foxglove, to be a violet? The next poem that I'm going to read is something that I wrote after, or at the end rather, of a 3-month group therapy experience that I had last fall with 5 other men who were also survivors of child sexual abuse. And it was a really powerful, important, harrowing experience to go through that with them. I'm really glad that I did it. And so at the end, I wrote this poem kind of for us, that specific group of people, but kind of more collectively for every man who has been the victim of child sexual abuse. So this is called The Testaments. Buried deep in the haunting of our bones lies, soft and still, the boy we once were and knew and feared for, in foreign beds and hollow, hungry houses. We sometimes wonder how he got out alive at all. In a hall of mirrors, in a tiny dressing room that extends out into infinity, he stares back with eyes that long to be believed, but there is no one but himself to knowingly catch his gaze. He tries on corduroy pants that will wind up twisted on the carpet like a doll's costume, the creases long ago transformed into stubborn wrinkles. No amount of ironing can ever hammer them fully out. We know, of course, that there can be a murder scene without blood. Those are the tricky cases, the ones that confound hard-boiled detectives for decades. They rot in the sun like forgotten meat. We know all of this. We are the connoisseurs of such a delicacy. We have felt it become an immutable part of our being, like a hernia scar or broken tibia that aches in October rainstorms. We have carried him through all the seasons of our misshapen youth and dilapidated manhood as he made our footfalls deeper in the mud of memory. But we are so much more than what we buried. We are the testaments to the fact that gates can rust and not break. Valleys can yield good earth following avalanches. Kisses can be reclaimed for ourselves. Hollowed out hearts can be refilled, remade, renewed. Last poem is something of a love poem, and I think that it's important, something I want to get across in talking about the book is that it's obviously very deep and heavy and can be difficult to sit with sometimes, but something that I'm consciously trying to do as we're constructing this book, which is still obviously in process, is to ensure that it's clear that there is a journey toward healing and there is joy and love and connection, and that it is not all thinking on and reflecting on the pain of the past. So this is called caught in a storm, delighted. Heat lightning in a flash inside our bedroom illuminates the walls, sheets your olive skin. My heart dances inside my rib cage at just the right rhythm for the moment. I do not float, I do not shrink, I do not cry. You help me move the way my body wants to move. When you drag your fingers through my beard, I am spellbound by your touch, planted nowhere else but here. To kiss you is to know you, strong, passionate, longing, fierce. I want to know you more and more every day for the rest of our lives. Can we extend this? A drop of water building on the edge of a leaf, waiting to fall. We're in a swarming monsoon. I join you in being unafraid to get deliciously wet, shirts sticking tight to our skin. As long as I am with you, I feel safe. The rain can pound down for months, but with you, I am fixed. You are the earth and I am the roots. We turn our heads skyward as the walls fall, the heavens pour down. Rain pelts the forest floor, our backs and arms. We bleed like watercolor. I breathe into you and you breathe into me. What a moment. We let it linger like a bead on a leaf of grass, glistening and pure.
All right, Phil Goldstein, everybody. That was excellent. Thank you so much for reading. So we're gonna do a few questions now with Phil.
Sure.
So the first thing everyone here is going to ask, when poetry and why? You know, when did you start writing and why did you start doing it? You work in content marketing, you have a background in journalism, and yet here you are performing at this poetry reading. How did you get here?
So it's funny, I actually started writing poetry before I definitively knew that I wanted to study or do journalism. I started writing poetry in like 7th grade, and that doesn't mean that it was good, but you know, I wrote poetry through middle school and high school, and in college I did slam poetry performances. And then after college, I think that my writing kind of dropped off for a while, but I would say it was after the 2016 election actually that I started writing more, you know, about topical things. And in early 2018, I started speaking with a therapist for the first time about the abuse and started writing poetry about it to help me process. And I had never told anybody about the abuse at all, ever. And writing was a really good way to help me process that. It's always been, for me, the best way that I communicate, and it just became very cathartic.
So going off of that, can you explain the process of how you went about working on this book? I know that you worked with at least one other writer who gave you some feedback before you brought it to me. I'm curious as to how these kind of congealed after that beginning question and what we touched on.
Sure. I think I wrote my first poem about the abuse probably in July of 18, and I started writing more and more. And after I'd written about a half dozen or a dozen poems, my then girlfriend, now fiance, Jenny, actually was the one who encouraged me to think about writing a book of poetry as a way to help other survivors. So I started thinking about what that would look like and what I would want to tell or explain, and kind of the pain and the empathy that I would want to convey to other survivors. So I wrote a first draft of the manuscript by the spring of 2019, and I asked a friend of mine from college, who's a wonderful and talented poet, Rachel Mennes, to help me, you know, edit it and shape it and think about it, which I'm incredibly grateful for. And she helped me revise and get things to the point where in the summer of 19, I felt comfortable enough to start sending it out to contests and presses for review. And in addition to Stillhouse, I tabulated this for you actually, Tommy. I wound up submitting to 31 other contests or presses, and which sounds like a lot, but actually isn't. And I was obviously very stunned and grateful when Stillhouse accepted the manuscript, because it was something that I was not expecting to happen. At that point in time, it happened a lot sooner than I was expecting.
Yeah, this is a branch out question, but how soon after you submitted did it get accepted? I'm curious.
So I started sending out manuscripts in August of 2019, and I believe that we finalized things in April of this year. So it was only about 8 months, which, as these things go, is pretty remarkable. I was kind of expecting this to be a multi-year, bordering on 5 to 10 year long process, especially because I'm not somebody who got an MFA, and my background is not academically in poetry.
Okay, so we got one more for you. What gave you the courage to tell your story? Now, you've gone public in a manner that is inspiring and really important for a lot of people who need to see people doing that and need to feel validated in doing that themselves, being able to tell their story. What advice would you give to other survivors, especially male survivors in this context, who may not feel they're ready to talk about their trauma?
Sure. I think one of the things that being in therapy has taught me about abuse and trauma is that it's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something that I should be ashamed of anymore. And it was this secret that I held on to for almost 20 years, and it really kind of burrowed its way into every corner of my psyche and affected a lot of things subconsciously, including this feeling that I had to be perfect and constantly be achieving, to be something that my parents could be proud of. It created in me a very kind of people-pleasing attitude. It really screwed up my relationship to sex and intimacy, all of those things. And so therapy has really helped me understand that what happened wasn't my fault, that I didn't need to remain silent or ashamed about it, and that in fact, speaking up, and that started with family and close friends, would help make it easier for men, would help make it easier for me to really accept those things. And the more that I spoke about it, the more it became easier to speak about it. So I mentioned that the group therapy that I did, and one of the things that I took away from that, in addition to just the enormous respect that I have for the men who were in that group, is that there's still such a strong stigma against speaking out about sexual abuse if you're a man. There's this pervasive belief that you're not a real man if you were abused, or it somehow means you were gay, especially if the person who abused you was a man, and that you're somehow less than. So that experience really strengthened my conviction to want to write the book and get it out into the world. So I would advise someone who has been abused, especially if you're a man, if you know what happened to you, or even if you have a vague recollection about what happened to you, but you're not totally sure, to work with and find a compassionate, trauma-informed therapist. I was somebody who thought for forever, oh, I don't need to do therapy, that's not for me, I don't have anything to talk to a therapist about, but obviously I did. And so that's definitely the first step. And then I think with them you'll hopefully be able to think about and unpack what happened, and be in a better position to talk with the people who are closest to you about what happened. And it's a very long journey that I'm still on, but my hope with the book is that it speaks to men who have gone through abuse, that it shows that there's somebody out there who understands their experience, and that it shows that you can speak out and survive, that it's not going to be the end of your world if you speak out about this. It's actually going to be, hopefully, the beginning of something very healing.
All right. Now I'm going to ask you one more question. Who is your biggest hero?
Oh gosh, I don't know if I have a specific answer for that. I would say two people come to mind. One is John Lewis, recently departed, and one is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, actually. You know, both incredible Americans, incredible people who really fought for equality and the expansion of rights. And so, you know, I don't think that there's really anything more heroic than that.
All right, great. Well, I think that concludes our reading. Rebecca, did you want to say anything else?
Thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for sharing your poems and answering our questions. This was wonderful. Hopefully we can do one of these again sometime. So thank you for watching. I'm going to end our live video now, and you all can come back and rewatch this later if you would like. Bye.